Captain Jake Morrison floated in the observation deck of the research ship Neptune's Dawn, staring at the massive black shape ahead of them. The alien vessel hung dead in space, its dark hull reflecting no light from the distant star. It was huge, easily 10 times the size of his own ship, and it had been drifting here for who knows how long. "Captain, we're getting some strange readings from that thing," called out Ryan Blake from the communications station. The young officer's voice carried a mix of excitement and worry. "The metal it's made from doesn't match anything in our databases?" Jake pushed himself away from the window and floated back to his command chair. 3 months they had been traveling to reach this place after the deep space sensors picked up the unknown object. 3 months of wondering what they would find. Out here in the empty space between stars. "Any signs of life aboard?" Jake asked. "Nothing on the scanners, sir. But there's definitely power still running through some sections. Whatever this thing is, it's not completely dead." Dr. Lisa Carter looked up from her workstation where she had been studying the preliminary scans. She was the best xenorchaeologist in human space, and if anyone could figure out what they were looking at, it would be her. "Captain, based on the material composition and the way it's constructed, I'd say this ship is old." "Really old? Maybe millions of years?" Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Humanity had been exploring space for over 200 years now, and they had found plenty of dead worlds and ancient ruins. But they had never found anything like this. Nothing this big, and nothing that still had power running through it after. "So much time. Commander Foster, what's our status?" Jake called out to his second-in-command. Amy Foster was busy coordinating with the engineering teams. She had been with Jake for 5 years now, and he trusted her judgment completely. "All systems green, Captain." "The boarding teams are ready to go whenever you give the word," Jake nodded. They had come all this way, and now they were finally going to get some answers. "All right, people, we're going aboard that thing. I want full environmental suits and constant contact with the ship. Nobody goes anywhere alone, and at the first sign of trouble, we're out of there." The boarding party consisted of Jake, Lisa, Amy, and 6 security officers. They used the shuttle to dock with what looked like an airlock on the alien ship's side. The moment they stepped inside, Jake knew they were dealing with something beyond anything humanity had encountered before. The corridors were massive, easily 3 times the height a human would need. But strangely, there were smaller walkways and controls that seemed built for beings about their size. It was as if the ship had been designed for 2 completely different species. "The atmosphere is breathable," Amy reported, checking her scanner. "Oxygen, nitrogen, close enough to Earth normal that our suits aren't necessary, but I recommend we keep them on anyway." They moved deeper into the ship, following what seemed to be a main corridor. The walls were covered in writing that looked almost familiar, but Lisa couldn't place it. There were symbols and patterns that reminded her of human languages, but changed somehow, evolved beyond recognition. "Captain, I'm picking up a strong energy signature from up ahead," Ryan's voice crackled through their communicators from the shuttle. "Whatever's generating power on that ship, you're getting close to it." The corridor opened up into a vast chamber filled with strange machines. Most of them were dark and silent, but a few still hummed with power. In the center of the room stood something that looked like a computer terminal, but built on a scale that dwarfed anything humans had created. Lisa approached the terminal carefully. The symbols on its surface seemed to shift and change as she watched, almost as if they were alive. "This is incredible. The technology here is so far beyond ours that I can barely understand what I'm looking at." "Can you access it?" Jake asked. "I think so. The interface seems to be responding to my presence." Lisa reached out and touched one of the glowing panels. Immediately, the terminal came to life, projecting images and text into the air above them. "What?" They saw next changed everything. The images showed star maps, but not like any they had seen before. These maps showed the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago, with civilizations and trade routes that no longer existed. And everywhere, in those maps, one name kept appearing over and over again: human. "That can't be right," Amy said, staring at the projections. "Humans have only been in space for 200 years. We've never been to most of these places." But Lisa was reading the text that accompanied the images and her face had gone pale. According to this, humans weren't just in space millions of years ago, we were everywhere. These records describe us as the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. Jake felt his mouth go dry. What are you talking about? Look at this. Lisa pointed to a series of images showing space battles. The ships in the battles were clearly human in design, but they were massive war vessels unlike anything humanity had ever built. This says that humans controlled over half the galaxy, and they didn't do it through trade or diplomacy. They did it through conquest. The terminal continued to display information showing planet after planet falling to human forces. The records spoke of human tactical brilliance, of their ability to adapt to any situation, of their absolute ruthlessness in war. Other species in the galaxy had feared them above all else. But where did they go? Ryan asked through the communicator. If humans were so powerful, what happened to them? Lisa continued reading, her hands shaking as she translated the ancient text. It says here that the humans vanished suddenly. One day they controlled half the galaxy, the next day they were gone. Their ships, their colonies, their entire civilization just disappeared. Jake stared at the projections showing the extent of human space. It was enormous, covering systems that were now controlled by dozens of different alien species. None of those species had ever mentioned humans in their historical records. It was as if humanity had been completely erased from galactic history. There's more, Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. This terminal isn't just showing us historical records, it's been waiting for us. Waiting for humans to find it. What do you mean? Amy asked. Lisa touched another panel, and new information began to appear. This ship belongs to something called the Vorthik Empire, and according to these records, they were part of a coalition of alien species that worked together to solve what they called the human problem. Jake felt ice in his veins. What kind of solution? Memory wipe, Lisa said, reading directly from the terminal. They didn't destroy humanity. They erased our memories and relocated the survivors to a remote planet where they could live peacefully, never knowing what they had once been. The chamber fell silent except for the humming of the ancient machines. Jake looked around at his crew, seeing his own shock reflected in their faces. Everything they thought they knew about human history was wrong. Earth wasn't humanity's birth world. It was their prison. Captain, Ryan's voice came through the communicator, tight with urgency. I'm picking up multiple contacts on long-range sensors, big ones, and they're heading for the Sol system fast. Jake's training kicked in, pushing aside the overwhelming revelations. How long until they reach Earth? At their current speed, maybe 6 days. Captain, there are a lot of them, more ships than humanity has ever seen in one place. Lisa was still working at the terminal, pulling up more information. Jake, you need to see this. The coalition that erased human memory, they've been watching Earth, and according to this, they've decided that keeping humanity peaceful is no longer worth the risk. Jake stared at the projections showing the approaching fleet. Somewhere in the back of his mind, something was stirring. An instinct he had never felt before, but which felt strangely familiar. It was the feeling a predator gets when it realizes it's being hunted. They're coming to finish what they started, he said quietly. Amy was already moving toward the exit. We need to get back to Earth, we need to warn them. But Jake was still staring at the ancient records of human conquest, feeling that strange new instinct growing stronger. Warn them of what? That we used to be warriors, that we once conquered half the galaxy? He turned to look at his crew. Maybe it's time we remembered who we really are. The terminal pulsed with new information, as if responding to his words. And somewhere deep in Jake's mind, something that had been sleeping for 3 million years began to wake up. The emergency broadcast reached Earth just as Greg Williams was finishing his morning coffee in the Global News Network studio. He had been a news anchor for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for the message that came through the deep. Space communication array? This is not a drill, Greg said into the camera, his hands trembling slightly as he read from the script that had been rushed to him minutes earlier. Captain Jake Morrison of the research vessel Neptune's Dawn has transmitted urgent information regarding an approaching alien fleet. All military personnel are ordered to report to their stations immediately. Across the globe, humans stopped what they were doing to stare at their screens. First contact with alien life had always been a dream for humanity, but this wasn't the peaceful meeting they had imagined. The aliens were coming to Earth, and according to the message from Neptune's Dawn, they weren't coming to talk. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of Earth Defense Station Alpha, staring at the holographic display showing the approaching alien fleet. The ships were still days away, but their size and number made her stomach turn. Earth's entire space fleet consisted of maybe 200 vessels, most of them designed for exploration and research. The aliens had over 1,000 ships, and each one was larger than anything humanity had ever built. "Ma'am, we're getting reports from all the defense stations," reported Lieutenant Ben Hayes, one of her communications officers. "Everyone wants to know what we're supposed to do. Our weapons are designed to deal with asteroids and space debris, not military attacks." Kate had been in the military for 20 years, working her way up through the ranks during humanity's peaceful expansion into space. She had trained for possible conflicts with other human colonies, never imagining she would be preparing to defend Earth itself against alien invaders. "Get me a direct line to President Carter," she ordered, "and start pulling back all our ships from the outer colonies. We're going to need everything we have here." The message from Neptune's Dawn had included more than just a warning about the approaching fleet. It had included the impossible revelation that humanity had once been a galactic superpower, warriors who had conquered half the known galaxy before being mysteriously defeated and mind-wiped by an alien coalition. Dr. Claire Mitchell sat in her laboratory at the Geneva Research Institute, staring at the genetic data that had been transmitted along with Captain Morrison's warning. The DNA samples from the ancient alien ship matched human DNA perfectly, but there were differences. Sequences that didn't exist in modern humans, genetic markers that had been somehow deactivated. "This is impossible," she muttered, running the analysis for the 10th time. These genetic sequences, if they were active, would completely change human physiology. Enhanced reflexes, improved muscle development, accelerated healing, increased brain function in stress situations. Her assistant, Dr. Peter Walsh, looked over her shoulder at the data. Could they have been artificially removed? Not removed, Claire said, her excitement growing despite the dire situation. Suppressed. These sequences are still in our DNA, but they've been turned off. It's like someone flipped a switch in the human genome 3 million years ago. Meanwhile, the first test of humanity's awakening powers was happening 30,000 kilometers above Mars. Lieutenant Ben Hayes had volunteered to pilot one of the experimental interceptor craft being rushed into service. His mission was simple: engage the alien scout ships that had arrived ahead of the main fleet and gather intelligence about their capabilities. Ben had been a good pilot before, but as his craft approached the alien vessels, something strange began happening to him. His vision seemed sharper, his reactions faster. Information that should have overwhelmed him was processed instantly, battle strategies forming in his mind without conscious thought. The alien scout ship fired first, sending a beam of energy that should have destroyed Ben's much smaller craft. Instead, Ben found himself moving in patterns he had never learned, dodging the attack and returning fire with precision that surprised even him. His targeting computer couldn't keep up with the speed of his decisions. "Control, this is Hayes," he reported, his voice strangely calm despite being in the middle of a space battle. "I've disabled the first scout ship, moving to engage the second target." Admiral Sullivan watched the battle from Earth Defense Command, unable to believe what she was seeing. Ben Hayes was outflying alien pilots with technology far superior to his own. It wasn't just luck or skill. It was as if he had been born to fight in space. "Ma'am, we're getting similar reports from all our interceptor pilots," reported Commander Amy Foster, who had returned to Earth aboard a fast courier ship from Neptune's Dawn. "They're all performing beyond their normal capabilities. Something is happening to them." The change wasn't limited to military personnel. Across Earth, humans were beginning to experience strange sensations. Engineers found themselves understanding complex problems with unusual clarity. Scientists were making intuitive leaps that would normally take months of research. And everyone was feeling a growing sense of anger toward the approaching alien fleet. President Alan Carter stood before the United Earth Council, looking at the faces of the representatives from every nation on the planet. The revelation about humanity's true origins had shaken the foundations of everything they believed about themselves. "The evidence is clear," he said, gesturing to the holographic displays showing the genetic data and historical records from the alien ship. "We are not who we thought we were. Our ancestors were not peaceful explorers who slowly developed space travel. They were conquerors who ruled half the galaxy." "But why don't we remember?" asked the representative from the European Federation. "How could such a massive part of our history be completely erased?" Dr. Claire Mitchell stepped forward to address the council. "Based on the genetic evidence, I believe our memories weren't just erased. Our entire nature was artificially suppressed. The Alien Coalition didn't just make us forget our past. They changed us at the genetic level to make us peaceful." President Carter looked around the room at the worried faces of Earth's leaders. Outside, the alien fleet was getting closer with each passing hour, and their scouts were already engaging human defenders above Mars. The time for debate was running out. "Dr. Mitchell, in your professional opinion, is it possible to reverse what was done to us?" Claire nodded slowly. "The genetic sequences are still there, just deactivated. In theory, they could be reactivated, but I have no idea what the full effects would be. We could be unleashing something we can't control." "What choice do we have?" asked the military representative. "Our current forces can't stop what's coming. If we have the potential to defend ourselves, we have to try." Ben Hayes was returning from his third successful engagement with alien scouts when the change hit him fully. One moment he was flying normally, the next moment his mind was flooded with knowledge he had never learned. Battle tactics from campaigns he had never fought, strategies for warfare on a scale humanity had never attempted, and an understanding of alien psychology that came from somewhere deep in his genetic memory. "Control, this is Hayes," he reported, but his voice had changed. It was colder now, more focused. "The alien ships are using standard Vorthak Empire defensive patterns. I recommend we implement flanking maneuver Gamma 7 and target their power distribution nodes." Admiral Sullivan stared at the communication screen. "Hayes, where did you learn about Vorthak Empire tactics?" "I don't know, ma'am," Ben replied, sounding confused by his own knowledge. "The information just came to me. It's like I've always known it, but I'm just remembering it now." Similar reports were coming in from all over Earth's defense network. Human soldiers and pilots were displaying knowledge and abilities they shouldn't possess, fighting with skills that seemed to come from ancestral memory rather than training. President Carter made his decision, using the alien technology recovered from the derelict ship. Earth scientists had managed to create a broadcast system that could reach every human in space. The signal would be designed to fully activate the suppressed genetic sequences in human DNA. "Dr. Mitchell, are you certain about this?" he asked one final time. "No, sir, I'm not certain about anything anymore," she replied honestly. "But I am certain that if we don't try, we're all going to die." Carter nodded and gave the order. The signal was transmitted from every communication array on Earth and throughout human space, a genetic wake-up call that had been 3 million years in the making. The effect was immediate. Across Earth, humans doubled over in pain as their genetic code rewrote itself. But when they straightened up, they were different. Their eyes were sharper, their movements more controlled, and their minds filled with the memories of a warrior race that had once ruled the stars. Jake Morrison felt the change hit him as Neptune's dawn raced back toward Earth. The mild-mannered research captain was gone, replaced by someone who understood warfare at a level that terrified and exhilarated him at the same time. "Amy," he said to his second-in-command, who was also experiencing the transformation, "send a message to the alien fleet." "What should It's a Captain? Jake smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Colonel Steve Rogers stood in the briefing room of the newly activated Mars Defense Station, looking at the faces of his soldiers. They were the same men and women who had been under his command for the past 3 years, but they were different. Now, the genetic awakening had changed them all, and the change was still happening. "Listen up, people," Steve said, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there a week ago. "The alien main fleet will be in weapons range in 18 hours. Intelligence reports indicate they're expecting to face the same humans they defeated 3 million years ago. Peaceful, confused, easy to control." Private Danny Cole raised his hand. He had been a supply clerk before the awakening, but now he was analyzing tactical data with the skill of a career military strategist. "Sir, what they're going to face instead?" Steve smiled, and it was the kind of smile that would have frightened him a week ago. "They're going to face us, the real us. The us that conquered half the galaxy and made every other species afraid to sleep at night." The transformation wasn't just happening to military personnel. On Earth, engineer Rachel Stone was working on modifications to the defense platforms that surrounded the planet. The designs flowing through her mind weren't based on human engineering principles she had learned in school. They were based on memories of siege warfare against alien fortifications on worlds she had never seen. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered to herself as she worked, her hands moving with practiced efficiency to implement changes that should have taken weeks to design. "How do I know that targeting the Vorthak power systems will cause a cascade failure? How do I know what Vorthak power systems even look like?" But she did know. Somewhere in her genetic memory was the knowledge of dozens of alien technologies. Gathered over centuries of conquest by ancestors, she was only now beginning to remember. Dr. Paul Anderson was experiencing the same phenomenon in his weapons research laboratory. The particle beam designs he was creating were based on principles that hadn't been discovered by human science but which felt as familiar to him as breathing. He was building weapons that his ancestors had used to crack open alien battle stations. "The beauty of it," he said to his assistant, "is that we don't need to reinvent everything. We just need to remember it." Meanwhile, in the cold depths of space, the Vorthak Empire fleet was beginning to understand that something had gone terribly wrong with their plan. Fleet Commander Vexthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the tactical displays with growing concern. "Commander, the human ships are not behaving as our projections indicated," reported his tactical officer. "They're using formation patterns that we haven't seen in 3 million years." Vexthal's scaled skin rippled with anxiety. The Vorthak were an ancient race, and their species' memory included the stories of the human wars. They had been part of the coalition that had defeated humanity, but only barely, and only through the use of weapons that had cost them entire star systems to deploy. "Are you certain these are the same humans we relocated to the third planet?" he asked. "Genetic scans confirm it, sir. But their behavior patterns match those of the ancient human military. It's as if they've somehow regained their original nature." Vexthal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature on his ship. The Coalition had spent 3 million years telling themselves that the human threat was ended, that the warriors who had nearly destroyed galactic civilization were gone forever. But the evidence was mounting that they had been wrong. The first major engagement began at the edge of the Sol system, where human forces had established a defensive line. Near Jupiter, Lieutenant Ben Hayes, now promoted to squadron commander, led a formation of 50 human fighters against a Vorthak battle group of 300 ships. The odds should have been impossible. But Ben and his pilots weren't fighting like the humans. The aliens remembered. They were fighting like their ancestors had, with a combination of tactical brilliance and absolute ruthlessness that made the Vorthak forces retreat in confusion. "Target the command ships first," Ben ordered over the communication network. "Once their leadership is eliminated, the rest will fall back to defensive positions. Then we hit them from 3 sides while they're regrouping." The attack proceeded exactly as Ben had predicted. The human fighters moved with coordination that seemed impossible for such a small force, striking at exactly the right moments to cause maximum damage. Within an hour, the Vorthok battle group was in full retreat, having lost 2/3 of their ships. Commander Hayes to Earth Defense Command, when reported. Enemy forces are withdrawing from the Jupiter perimeter. They're not used to fighting opponents who actually fight back. Admiral Sullivan watched the battle from her command center, still amazed by what she was seeing. Her forces were outnumbered 10-1, but they were winning. The genetic awakening had given humanity more than just military knowledge. It had given them back their nature as apex predators. "Ma'am, we're receiving surrender requests from several alien ships," reported her communications officer. "They're asking for terms." Kate laughed, a sound that contained no humor. "Tell them we don't negotiate with species that tried to wipe out our memories and keep us as pets. They can surrender unconditionally or they can die. Those are the only terms we offer." The message was transmitted to the alien fleet, and the response was immediate. More ships began breaking away from the main formation, their crews preferring to face human justice rather than human warfare. Communications specialist Nina Brooks was monitoring alien transmissions from her station on Earth's primary listening post. What she was hearing made her blood run cold, but not with fear, with anticipation. "Admiral, you need to hear this," she said, patching the intercepted communications through to the command center. "The Vorthok are talking to their allies. They're calling for full evacuation of the inner systems." The alien voices came through the speakers, translated by the computer systems that had been modified with knowledge from the ancient derelict. The fear in those voices was unmistakable. "The humans have awakened," one Vorthok commander was saying. "Repeat, the humans have awakened. This is not a conquest force. This is an extermination scenario. All coalition forces are to withdraw immediately and implement Protocol 7. Admiral Sullivan looked at her staff. "Does anyone know what Protocol 7 is?" Nina checked her files, cross-referencing with the data from the ancient ship. According to the historical records, Protocol 7 was the Coalition's plan for dealing with a full human military awakening. It involves the complete evacuation of all systems within 50 light-years of human space. "They're running," Kate said with satisfaction. "They're running before we've even started fighting seriously." But the aliens weren't just running. They were sending messages to every species in the galaxy, warning them that the sleeping war gods had awakened and that nowhere was safe. The psychological impact of humanity's return was spreading faster than their ships could travel. Captain Luke Evans, commanding the heavy cruiser Defiant, was pursuing a group of fleeing Vorthok ships when he made a decision that would echo throughout the galaxy. Instead of simply destroying the alien vessels, he opened a communication channel to every ship in the fleet. "This is Captain Evans of the human vessel Defiant," he said, his voice carrying across space to reach not just the fleeing ships but the recording devices that would spread his words to every corner of the galaxy. "I want every alien in this fleet to remember what you see here today. Remember that we gave you 3 million years of peace. Remember that we could have spent those years planning our revenge, but instead we lived quietly on one small world, bothering no one." He paused, watching as the alien ships continued their desperate flight. "But you couldn't leave well enough alone. You decided that even a peaceful humanity was too dangerous to allow. You came to our world to finish what you started 3 million years ago." His voice hardened. "So now you get to learn why your ancestors were so afraid of us that they were willing to commit genocide to stop us?" The Defiant's weapons fired, not to destroy the fleeing ships but to disable them. One by one, the alien vessels were crippled and left drifting in space, their crews alive but helpless. "You're going to go back to your homeworlds," Luke continued. "You're going to tell them what you saw here. You're going to tell them that humanity remembers who we are. And you're going to tell them that we're coming." The message was recorded and transmitted throughout the galaxy, carrying with it the promise of humanity's return to galactic prominence. But it also carried something else, the promise that this time humanity would not be merciful to those who had wronged them. On Earth, President Carter was meeting with the leaders of the awakened human colonies. The genetic signal had reached Every human settlement in space and the reports coming back were remarkable. Humanity wasn't just remembering how to fight. They were remembering how to build, how to organize, how to turn entire star systems into military resources. The mining operations on Kepler 442 have increased their output by 300%, reported a colonial administrator. It's as if our people suddenly know exactly how to extract resources with maximum efficiency. General Tony Clark stood on the command deck of the newly commissioned battleship Vengeance, watching as human forces swept through the Centauri system like a storm of metal and fire. 3 weeks had passed since the first engagement near Jupiter, and humanity's expansion had been swift and merciless. "General, we've secured the 4th planet," reported Colonel Mason Wright from the surface. The hegemony forces surrendered without firing a shot. They heard what happened to the Vorthak at Alpha Centauri and decided discretion was the better part of valor. Tony nodded, studying the tactical display that showed human fleets spreading out across a dozen star systems. Each victory brought more alien surrenders, and each surrender brought more resources and territory under human control. The galaxy was learning that resistance was futile, but submission was possible. "Any word from the Rigel system?" Tony asked. "Yes, sir. Admiral Foster reports the entire Crystalline Collective has evacuated their homeworlds. They left behind fully operational infrastructure and resource extraction facilities. We now control 17 systems without having to rebuild anything." The speed of humanity's advance was unprecedented in galactic history. But it wasn't just military conquest that was driving their success. The awakened humans possessed an understanding of alien psychology that their ancestors had learned through centuries of warfare. They knew exactly which species would fight to the death, and which would run at the first sign of real opposition. Intelligence Officer Helen Lewis was coordinating the psychological warfare campaign from her station aboard the command ship. Her team monitored every communication in alien space, tracking how news of human victories spread and analyzing the growing panic among coalition species. "General, the fear is spreading faster than our ships," she reported. "We're getting reports of entire systems evacuating before we even arrive. The Altarian Empire has pulled back all their forces to their core worlds and declared their border systems neutral territory." "Neutral," Tony repeated with amusement. "They think they can stay neutral in a war they started." Helen pulled up the psychological profile data her team had compiled. "Sir, the aliens are beginning to understand something that their ancestors knew, but they had forgotten. Humans don't just fight to win battles. We fight to ensure our enemies can never threaten us again." This was the key difference between humanity and the other species in the galaxy. Most aliens had evolved from prey species, developing intelligence and technology as ways to avoid predators. They fought only when cornered and sought peace as soon as possible. But humans had evolved from apex predators, and their approach to warfare reflected that heritage. Dr. Eric Miller was studying the ancient records on his research vessel, trying to understand the full scope of humanity's original empire. What he had discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The humans didn't just conquer territory, he explained to his team. They conquered the very concept of resistance. Look at these historical records from the vegan system. After the humans defeated the local forces, they didn't just occupy the planets. They restructured the entire social order to make rebellion impossible. His assistant, Dr. Sarah Kim, looked at the data with growing amazement. They turned their enemies into willing subjects. How is that possible? Psychological conditioning on a massive scale, Eric replied. The humans understood that the best way to prevent future wars was to make their former enemies grateful for human rule. They provided better living conditions, more efficient government, and protection from other threats. Within a generation, conquered species were volunteering for human military service. This same pattern was beginning to repeat itself in the current conflict. As human forces occupied alien systems, they weren't behaving like traditional conquerors. They were implementing improvements to alien infrastructure, establishing fair trade relationships, and offering protection to species that had been oppressed by the Coalition. The Zarathian Confederacy was the first major power to formally request human protection after their former coalition allies abandoned them to face a resource shortage crisis. Within days of human arrival, the crisis was solved using efficient extraction techniques that the humans seemed to know instinctively. "We don't want to rule the galaxy," General Clark explained to the Zarathian leadership during the formal surrender ceremony. "We want to make sure no one can ever again decide that humanity needs to be controlled or eliminated. Work with us and you'll prosper. Work against us and you'll discover why our ancestors were feared across half the galaxy." But not everyone was ready to surrender. The Vorthek Empire, facing the complete collapse of the coalition they had helped build, made a desperate decision. Fleet Commander Vexthal gathered the remnants of his forces and the last loyal coalition fleets at the ancient fortress world of Kethmoran. "We cannot allow the humans to complete their expansion," he declared to the assembled alien commanders. "If they consolidate control over the systems they've taken, they will be unstoppable. We must make our stand here." The fortress world of Kethmoran had been built specifically to counter human expansion 3 million years ago. Its massive defensive systems had been designed using knowledge of human tactics gained through bitter experience. If the coalition could hold this world, they might be able to negotiate a peace treaty that would preserve some portion of their territory, but the humans approaching Kethmoran were not the same warriors who had been defeated there 3 million years ago. They had learned patience during their exile on Earth, and they had learned to think strategically rather than just tactically. Captain Luke Evans, now commanding an entire battle fleet, studied the fortress world's defenses with interest rather than concern. The ancient defensive systems were impressive, but they had been built to counter the human military of the past, not the human military of the present. "The Vorthak made a mistake," he explained to his fleet commanders during the pre-battle briefing. "They're fighting the last war. They've prepared to face human forces who attack directly and overwhelm through superior firepower, but we've evolved beyond that. Instead of launching a direct assault on the fortress world, Luke implemented a strategy that the ancient humans would never have considered. He surrounded the system with human forces but made no move to attack. Instead, he began broadcasting messages to the alien forces trapped on the world. 'This is Captain Evans of the human fleet,' his message began. 'We know you're listening, we know you're afraid, and we know you're starting to understand that you made a terrible mistake when you decided to come after us.' The psychological warfare campaign that followed was devastating. Every alien in the fortress received detailed information about human victories throughout the galaxy, about coalition forces that had surrendered and been treated well, and about the futility of continued resistance. 'Your leaders told you that humans were genocidal monsters who would kill you all if they won,' Luke continued in his daily broadcasts. 'But look around you. How many human prisoners have we executed? How many worlds have we destroyed? How many species have we wiped out?' The answer was 0, and everyone in the fortress knew it. The humans were conquering territory and defeating military forces, but they weren't committing genocide. They were offering a choice: surrender and prosper, or fight and die. One by one, alien ships began leaving the fortress world. First a few small vessels, then entire squadrons, then whole fleets. Each defection weakened the defenders and strengthened the psychological pressure on those who remained. Dr. Nina Brooks, monitoring alien communications from her intelligence ship, reported on the growing chaos within the fortress. "General, they're turning on each other. The Vorthak commanders are accusing other species of cowardice, while those species are accusing the Vorthak of dragging them into an unwinnable war. Within 2 weeks, the great fortress of Kethmoran surrendered without a shot being fired." The psychological pressure had accomplished what 3 million years ago would have required a devastating siege. Fleet Commander Vexthal was brought aboard, Luke's flagship, as the last remnant of organized coalition resistance. The ancient Vorthak looked at Luke with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. "You fight differently than your ancestors," he said. Luke nodded. "We learned patience. We learned that sometimes the best way to win a war is to make your enemies." "Want to lose? What happens now?" Vexthal asked. Now you go home and tell your people that the war is over. Tell them that humanity is willing to share the galaxy, but only with species that accept human leadership in matters of galactic security. Tell them that the Coalition's dream of controlling humanity died the moment they decided to wake us up. As news of the Fortress World's surrender spread throughout the galaxy, the last organized resistance to human expansion collapsed. Species that had been preparing for war began sending diplomats instead of soldiers. The galaxy was learning a new reality. Humanity was back, and this time they were here to stay. President Carter received the reports of victory from his office on Earth, but he felt no celebration. The human race had remembered their power, but with that memory came responsibility. They were no longer the innocent explorers who had left Earth 3 weeks ago. They were the inheritors of an empire that had once ruled half the galaxy. 6 months after the surrender at Kethmoran, Ambassador Chris Parker stood in the Great Council chamber of the space station Unity, looking out at representatives from over 200 alien species. The massive station had been built in neutral space as a symbol of the new galactic order, a place where all species could meet under human protection. The Galactic Security Council will now come to order, Chris announced. The chamber fell silent as delegates from across the galaxy turned their attention to the human ambassador. Today we address the formal petition from the Altarian Empire regarding trade route security in the Outer Rim territories. The scene would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. Aliens who had once conspired to keep humanity locked away on Earth were now coming to human administrators to solve their problems. But the transition hadn't been as simple as victory and surrender. Dr. Maria Santos was working in her research facility on the Moon, studying the final pieces of humanity's hidden history. What she had discovered in the past few months had changed everything. They thought they knew about their ancestors and their exile. The mind wipe wasn't entirely the aliens' idea, she explained to her research team. According to these records, there was a faction of ancient humans who cooperated with the Coalition. They were horrified by what their species had become and worked with the aliens to create the exile scenario. Her assistant, Dr. Kevin Lane, looked up from his data analysis. "You're saying humans helped erase human memory?" "A group called the Peacekeepers," Maria replied, pointing to the ancient files. "They believed that humanity's warrior nature would eventually destroy the galaxy. They thought that starting over on Earth would allow humans to evolve beyond their predator instincts." The revelation had profound implications for the current situation. Humanity hadn't been victims of alien aggression. They had been participants. In their own exile, willing partners in an experiment to see if a warrior species could learn to live in peace. Fleet Admiral John Taylor was dealing with the practical implications of this discovery as he worked to establish the new galactic government. The humans weren't just conquerors returning to reclaim their empire. They were the children of exiles, who had chosen peace over power, and that choice was still echoing through their decisions. "We're not here to rule through fear," he told the gathered fleet commanders during their weekly strategy meeting. "Our ancestors made that mistake 3 million years ago. We're here to make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else." The new human approach to galactic governance was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of demanding tribute and establishing military occupation, humans were offering protection and partnership. Species that accepted human leadership found their problems solved, their economies improved, and their conflicts resolved. The crystalline collective had been facing extinction due to a plague that was killing their crystal-based life forms. Human scientists, drawing on genetic memories of similar problems from the ancient empire, developed a cure within weeks. The grateful collective became humanity's strongest. Supporters in the Outer Rim, the hegemony worlds, had been struggling with resource shortages that were causing civil wars between different factions. Human administrators, using economic principles, remembered from their ancestors' empire building, reorganized the trade networks, and ended the conflicts. Within months, the hegemony was more prosperous than it had been in centuries, but not everyone was happy with the new order. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral and commanding the exploration fleet, was investigating reports of resistance movements in the far reaches of the galaxy. They call themselves the Free Coalition, he reported to the Security Council from his flagship. Groups of species who refuse to accept human leadership and are trying to organize an independent government in the unexplored regions, Ambassador. Parker studied the intelligence reports with interest rather than concern. Are they a threat to galactic security? Not militarily, Jake replied. But they're spreading propaganda about human tyranny and trying to convince neutral species that we're planning to enslave the galaxy. The situation required careful handling. The humans could easily crush any resistance movement, but doing so would prove the rebels' point about human tyranny. Instead, they chose a different approach. Dr. Claire Mitchell, now heading the Department of Interspecies Relations, developed a response that drew on humanity's evolved understanding of psychology and diplomacy. Instead of attacking the Free Coalition, humans simply ignored them while demonstrating the benefits of cooperation. Let them build their independent government, she recommended to President Carter. But make sure every species in the galaxy can see the difference between life under human protection and life in their free territory. The contrast became obvious within months. The Free Coalition struggled with the same problems that had plagued the galaxy for millennia: resource conflicts, territorial disputes, and economic inefficiency. Meanwhile, species under human protection prospered and developed in ways they had never imagined possible. The psychological impact was devastating to the resistance movement. Species began leaving the Free Coalition voluntarily, requesting admission to the human-protected zones. The rebellion collapsed not through military defeat but through the simple demonstration that cooperation worked better than independence. Lieutenant Ben Hayes, now a captain commanding his own ship, was on patrol near the edge of human space when he encountered a group of refugee ships fleeing from the Free Coalition territory. "Captain, they're requesting asylum," his communications officer reported. "They say conditions in the Coalition space have become unbearable." Ben studied the ships on his scanner. They were from the Nexus Syndicate, one of the species that had been most vocal about refusing human leadership. Grant them safe passage to Unity Station. And send a message to the Free Coalition leadership. Tell them their people are welcome to join the rest of the galaxy whenever they're ready. The message was more than diplomatic courtesy. It was a demonstration of humanity's confidence in their system and their willingness to accept even former enemies as partners. The final test of the new order came when ancient automated defense systems in the galactic core began activating, threatening all life in the central systems. The weapons had been built millions of years ago by a long-dead species and were designed to activate if any single power gained too much control over the galaxy. Admiral Taylor coordinated the response, but the solution came from an unexpected source. The Free Coalition, despite their opposition to human leadership, sent their best technicians to help disable the ancient weapons. "We may not like your government," their leader explained, "but we're not willing to let the galaxy burn rather than accept it." Working together, human and alien teams managed to shut down the ancient defense grid. The crisis brought even the most stubborn holdouts into the human sphere of influence, not through conquest but through cooperation in the face of mutual extinction. Captain Luke Evans, now commanding the Deep Space Exploration Fleet, was charting new regions of the galaxy when he received the final reports on galactic unification. Every major species had formally joined the human-led Galactic Security Council. The last holdout colonies had requested protection after facing threats from unknown aliens in the galactic rim. "It's finished," he reported to Earth. "We've achieved what our ancestors never managed. We've unified the galaxy not through conquest but through choice." President Carter stood in his office on Earth, looking up at the stars through the transparent ceiling. His planet was no longer an isolated world on the edge of nowhere. It was the capital of a galactic civilization that stretched across thousands of systems and included billions of different life forms. But the transformation of Earth itself had been just as dramatic as the transformation of the galaxy. Human children were growing up knowing their true heritage, understanding that they were the descendants of both warriors and peacekeepers, Conquerors and exiles. In schools across Earth, children learned about their ancestors' empire and their ancestors' choice to give up that empire in search of something better. They learned that power without wisdom was destruction, but wisdom without power was helplessness. 8-year-old Emma Wilson raised her hand in her history class. Teacher, if our ancestors were so powerful, why did they choose to forget? Her teacher, Mrs. Angela Davis, smiled at the question that went to the heart of humanity's journey. Because they understood that being strong isn't enough. You have to be good too. They gave up their power so their children could learn to be both. Emma nodded thoughtfully. So we're not just strong like our old ancestors? No, Emma, we're better than our old ancestors. We have their strength, but we also have their wisdom. We know how to protect people without hurting them, and how to lead without controlling. The lesson was being taught in classrooms across human space, where children of dozens of different species learned together about the responsibility that came with power and the wisdom that came with choosing restraint. The galaxy had learned that humans were indeed sleeping war gods, but they had also learned that these gods had chosen to be guardians rather than conquerors.